All right, before we get into 2 Kings, and you can take your Bible if you would like and go ahead and find 2 Kings. Hey, Jackie, and I'll fix it later too. Just thank you, buddy. Jackie, y'all all say hi to Jackie back there. If it wasn't for Jackie, we'd be in trouble out here. Jackie comes around and counts heads because there's so many people in here, I can't count heads. And then we always get a few folks that come in late, and we have to sort of clean that up a little bit. But anyway, Jackie, thank you for helping out this morning and doing that. Also, Jackie helps with baptism. And when y'all want to, know who gets everything ready back there, Jackie's a huge part of that. We have people that do all kinds of things, and we appreciate them. In fact, that waterfall out there was off last week. It was splashing incorrectly. I don't know what happened. Somebody must have stuck a piece of gum on it or something. And now I notice it's fixed, and Jackie probably had something to do with that, so I appreciate him. Also, Miss Linda over here runs our kitchen, and we're grateful to her. And Wednesday night we had extra hamburger, and we were going to use them at the golf tournament, and we didn't get them out there. If any of y'all are wanting to carry home some hamburgers, Miss Linda said she'll help you find them, right? And y'all can just see her. And if y'all didn't know what you're having for lunch, you could have hamburgers. She'd be glad to give you some. All right, but as we get started today, who has some good news to share with us? We share prayer requests. Who has something wonderful you want to share? Anybody have anything good in your life this week God has done? All right, Mark, go ahead.
I can't remember if I mentioned last week that my youngest baby just got a promotion at work after working for this company for less than 4 months. It's a new position with a great deal of responsibility and a $12,480 a year raise.
All right, and then you're buying lunch where today? So that's what I'd like to. Oh, okay. All right, I just thought I'd ask. Well, that's good news.
Also, my work is, I'm a carpenter.
Uh-huh.
Specialize in windows and doors mostly, but do anything. And my work is feast or famine, and right now I am in a feast.
Well, and that's a good thing too. We like feast of work. That's lunch next week. So you can, and we hope your wife has a good time at her homecoming today. Who else has some good news to share with us today? Grandbaby number 4. That's awesome. I love other people having children. Man, other people having children is wonderful. All right, my baby started her senior year of high school this week, so yeah, that's kind of sad in a way. Yes, sir.
I want you to know that I've been going to the College Center in Lexington and made a lot of new friends.
Well, we're glad to hear that, Bill. A lot of good friends. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. Anybody else want to share anything good? Anybody have anything positive you want to share? Anything? God's done something good in your life. I don't want to dominate you guys. All right. Well, y'all take your Bible to 2 Kings chapter 12. 2 Kings chapter 12, and we're going to begin in verse 4 here in just a bit. Let's see. 20, 40, 54, 60, 66. Okay. 2 Kings chapter 12. And we're going to be looking at the idea that God needs to be honored today. I love Ben Franklin. Do y'all like Ben Franklin? Do y'all like Ben Franklin? Remember good old Ben Franklin? Ben, when I was a kid, I thought he was the guy that owned the 5 and dime store. Y'all remember the 5 and dime store? Did y'all have Ben Franklin 5 and dime? Did y'all have that? All right, we did too. But he's a little bit more than that. Ben Franklin is the one who said, if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. You gotta have plans, right? You gotta make plans in your life. And a lot of things fail because people are unwilling to plan, or they just don't look ahead. I was thinking this week about our Sunday school lesson and how I might introduce it to you. And I thought about all of those companies that used to exist but don't exist anymore because they failed to plan properly. How many of y'all remember going to Blockbuster? You know, you go get your VHS and you'd have your rewind fees. If you didn't rewind it, they'd charge you 75 cents or $1, whatever it was. And then, Blockbuster is no more because they failed to understand things were going digital. Most people don't know it, but Blockbuster had a great opportunity to buy and own Netflix. And so now you got Netflix that everybody's involved with, and Blockbuster is just a bunch of empty buildings that are now Chinese restaurants. I mean, they're all gone, right? They are no more. The same thing could be said for Polaroid. How many of y'all remember as a kid, your mom or somebody would get that camera and they would take the picture and the little paper would come out? And then they'd hold it up. And I don't know what they were doing, but Mom used to wave it. Was she drying it off? What was she doing when she would wave that? I don't think that helped a whole lot. But she would kind of wave it around, and then you would get a picture. We've taken Polaroid cameras into the third world, into poor countries. And I'm telling you what, if you want to be the most popular guy in a village in Honduras, get a Polaroid camera. Because when you get a Polaroid camera and you show them their picture, they are amazed that they can get that picture. Well, Polaroid is those things are not popular like they used to be because they thought that print would rule the day. Print doesn't rule the day. All of you guys have your phones that you take all these pictures on and then annoy people with them and show them to everybody. But anyway, that's all that we all do that kind of thing. Planning to fail, or failing to plan is always planning to fail. And so we're going to be in 2 Kings chapter 12 today, and we're going to be talking about making the right kind of plans in our life. And I hope that you're a planner. I hope that you have some commitment to doing the right things and to making plans, but I'm afraid that many people don't. I was reading this week as I prepared this lesson, and I just popped in the term retirement because I knew, there's some retired folks in here, some people who are going to be retiring one of these days. And what I found out that more than 1/3 of people don't start planning for retirement until they're 46 years of age. And that is waiting way too long. And they said that in 2019, 45% of people said they have $0 saved for retirement. 45% of people put aside nothing. And that 64% of people are going to retire essentially broke. And it's all because they fail to make plans that one of these days you're going to be a little older and you need to be prepared for that. Failing to plan is a bad thing. Now, let me also say before we get into 2 Kings 12 that churches can fail to plan. Last year in America, 4,500 churches closed. 4,500 churches closed. Now, 3,000 churches started, but most of those who start, or many of those that start, will not survive past 5 or 10 years. And many of those churches fail to lay the right kind of plans. They don't get things organized like they should. Now, COVID has done a number on churches anyway. We know that. Everybody's been impacted by it. But what you may not know is that the median size of churches in this country has changed. It has dropped from 137, that's the median of every church in the country 20 years ago. Now the median across the country of every church is 65. We went from 137 people being the mid to 65. I mean, now just so y'all know, we've got more than that in here this morning. In the Sunday school class, we've got more people than that sitting in this room. You're bigger than most churches in America. This class. What happens to churches? Why do they struggle like they do? Why do most churches fail? Well, I think a lot of them fail because they're not intergenerational. They don't realize that God wants people from every age category to be making up the church. Now, as I look across this room, we've got people from every age category in this room this morning. But we have people from nursery all the way to senior adults. We value every one of those. We believe that every age group is very, very significant in the life of the church. And we believe that younger people need to learn from the older people. The older people need to find energy and strength out of those younger people, that there's a relationship between the groups, right? But a lot of churches don't plan for that. And I think that is a mistake. Other churches fail to adapt to changing demographics. Let me tell you what I mean by that. And I want you to hear this. Henderson County is not the way it was 25 years ago. This county has changed. Now, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but if I can just tell you by looking around the room here, I can tell you by looking around this room how many of you were in this church 25 years ago, and I see about 7, maybe tops. The demographics of this community has changed. The groups that are here have changed. We now have people teaching Sunday school who are from England. We have people who are from Wyoming by way of Zambia. We have people who are coming into our communities from California and Colorado. I met people this morning from Colorado who are here. I mean, our community is changing. Now, you can sit back and say, oh, I can't believe everything's changing. Or we can say, thank the Lord. We've been trying for years to go to the nations. Now they're coming to us. Why don't we welcome people, right? And that's our task, is to welcome people. But a lot of churches will not engage with those changing demographics and will not embrace those changing demographics. We're going to do that. We have been doing that for a long time, and we're going to continue to do that and to reach out. There are people who will be in this church this morning, like I said, from New York, Illinois, Indiana, Florida, I mean, all over. And there's a few who are actually from Tennessee. And so we need to embrace that in the life of this church. Now, again, why do churches fail? Well, they're not intergenerational. They don't embrace the changing demographics. A lot of them are using old methodologies. Now, look, I love the old story. You could give me a Broadman hymnal, green and faded, and I can tell you what's on page 162, man. Amazing Grace, no, that's Just As I Am, 162. Amazing Grace, I think, was 160. But, I mean, I grew up with that hymnal. I love that old thing, man. My mother, I mean, I go to her church. I think they might still use it. You give me one of those things, I'm cool. I'm great with it, okay? Give me an old Hammond organ that squeals like a set of brakes that wasn't put on right. I'm okay with that. But you know what? Most people aren't, right? Most people, to reach a new generation, the methodologies of the church have to change. Now, the message of the church doesn't change. We preach Jesus Christ and Him crucified, right? We preach that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. Nobody's going to come to the Father but by Him. But methodologies have to change. And they have always been so. I don't know if you know this or not, but when Isaac Watts was writing those great old hymns, when I survey the wondrous cross, you know, those kind of things. Boy, that was a bad off key. But anyway, when he was writing those old things, do you know everybody was saying, that is of the devil. That music is newfangled. That is something we can't have in our churches. They didn't like that. And now we look back at that as the old stuff. It's methodology that has to change, and the church has to change with it. And it's hard. I noticed when we moved into this building 2 years ago, I noticed several things, and I think they're kind of funny, to be honest with you. Can I tell you what they are? One of the things I noticed is that if you sat on this side in the old building, you came in here and you were looking, all right, where's my seat in here? And you were looking on this side in the new building. I mean, if you were on the back row, you were like, all right, now how many seats are on the back row, and where can I find my seat? And it was just the strangest thing. It was almost like we just sort of transplanted ourselves, because we love to get in a rut, don't we? And let me tell you what a rut is. A rut is nothing but a grave with both ends blown out. You'll die in that rut if you're not careful. And there are churches all over this country, Lord bless them, who are dying in the rut that they are in. Now look, I'm good with the old Broadman hymnal. I'm good with all that. I love all that. But our task is to reach people with the gospel. And so we need to be open to making sure that what we're doing honors the Lord. Look in 2 Kings chapter 12. Here, I want to show y'all what we've got to do here. 2 Kings chapter 12 is a passage where we learn about a king by the name of Joash. Now, your Bible might say Jehoash, but it's Joash. And so if you have an NIV, I'm sure it'll pronounce it a little bit differently. But Joash is a king who reigned 40 years according to verse 1 in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Zebiah of Beersheba. He did what was right, verse 2, in the sight of the Lord all the days of his life, in which Jehoiada the priest instructed him. But still there was evil in the land. The high places weren't taken away. The people still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places. And that's a little bit of his background. Let me tell you his whole background. Joash was a guy who was grateful just to be alive. And he was grateful to be alive because when he was just a wee little thing, his dad died. his dad, who was king, died. And his grandmother, who was, what do you call them in England, the queen mum, you know, she was the queen mum. She decides that she's not going to let any of her son's children be king. She's going to run the country. And she is evil. She is awful. And she begins to have people murder her own grandchildren so that none of the grandchildren can be a threat to the throne. Now, her name was Athaliah, but nevertheless, she was a horrible, horrible human being. And she was going to kill them all. Except for one nurse takes Joash and hides him in a bedroom and absconds him away and takes care of him when he's a little bitty boy. Now, Merle Haggard used to sing that old song, you know, Mama tried to raise me right. Nobody tried to steer me right, but Mama tried. Y'all remember that old song by Merle Haggard? Some of y'all know Merle Haggard, the theologian. Mama tried to raise me better, but her heating I denied. And that leaves only me to blame because Mama tried. Y'all remember that old song from Merle Haggard, okay? Well, Joash never could sing Mama Tried. And he sure couldn't sing Grandmama Tried. All Grandmama tried to do was kill him. But some kind nurse takes him away, and when he is 7 years old, the leaders of the priests finally say it is time. And they bring out this little boy, and they bring him into the temple. They get all of the coronation set up. They get the trumpets. They get the pageantry. They get it all set up. And here comes in Grandma, and she says, treason, treason, you're all traitors. And they say, we're going to make this little boy king. And by the way, take her out there. Don't do it in the temple because this is holy. Take her out there and take some swords and you dispose of her. And that's how she got done away with. But in the middle of it all, Joash has got a rule. Well, 7-year-olds, they don't really know how to run a country. So there are godly people like Jehoiada, who is a priest, who helps him out and who gives him some instructions. But look in verse 4 because that's where we're going to pick up in how Joash begins to honor the Lord with his actions. Verse 4. And Joash said to the priest, all the money of the dedicated gifts that are brought into the house of the Lord, each man's census money, each man's assessment money, and all the money that a man purposes in his heart to bring into the house of the Lord, let the priests take it themselves, each from his constituency, and let them repair the damages of the temple wherever any dilapidation is found. Joash comes along and he says, wait a minute now, I'm going to do what's right in the sight of the Lord. Jehoiada has said we ought to honor God, but I'm looking at this temple. And this temple has been here for 125 years. And I don't know how your house holds up, but after 125 years, there's some things that probably need to be done. 125 years of weather, of drought, of use, and the temple is in disrepair. And so he says, here's what we're going to do. We're going to fix this because it doesn't honor God to have a temple that looks like a worn-out train station. We need to honor God with what we have. And so he is going to commit himself and to commit his nation to begin to honor God. Now, if you look in verse 4, he talks about various sources of money. He talks about, for example, money that's dedicated to the house of the Lord, people's census money, people's assessment money. He talks about various types of money. And then he talks about in verse 4, all the money that a man purposes in his heart to bring into the house of the Lord. And he talks about these different sources. Now, there were some things that were required of the people. They would have to give certain things. But other times people would just say, I love God with all my heart, and I'd like to give some extra. And he said, you know, bring that as well. If you give something or dedicate something in your heart, bring that too. Now, here's the thing of the Old Testament. You didn't have to give voluntary gifts. But if you made a pledge to give a voluntary gift, you were obligated to pay the vow and to pay the pledge. And so what Joash is saying is don't lie to God. If God is your primary loyalty, then you need to make sure that when you make a pledge to God, you carry it out. Don't be down here telling God something you're not going to do. I think that's a good principle for today, don't you? And don't come down here to this altar and start telling God stuff you're not going to do. If you come before the Lord, you be honest with God. Don't lie to God. If you say, God, I'm going to be committed to you and your son and whatever, you be faithful to that. God expects us to be faithful to the vows that we have. But I want you to notice, excuse me, what happens in verse 5. He says, let the priest take the money themselves, each from his constituency. Now, you may ask, what is the constituency? If you have an NIV, it will say from the treasurers. He's talking about people who were bookkeepers. And he said, here's how we're going to run this deal. The way we're going to run this deal is the priests are going to go to these people who are kind of bookkeeper, accountant type people. They're going to receive the money from them. Then they're going to go out and they're going to oversee the damages to the temple wherever any dilapidation is found. They're going to go and they're going to oversee this entire project because it needs doing. That's how the organization was set up. Because Joash, again, believed that God's house needed to be in great order. It needed to be in great repair. Now, let me say this. And I just saw, two rabbits go down a rabbit trail. Let me just chase them while I'm in the neighborhood. Many years ago, I heard a man stand up and preach a sermon. I thought it was very wise. He preached it from one of the Old Testament prophets, and he talked about how we should never give scraps to the master. Don't give God your scraps. I thought that's a good word. Don't give God your scraps. Back in the days of the Old Testament, people were just like they are today. Sometimes they would want to give a gift, but they were giving God their scraps. There's even one of the prophets who says, don't bring as an offering your blind and your lame and those that are halt. Don't bring those animals that you wouldn't have. Why do you bring junk and then you keep the good for yourself? You bring to God the first fruits. You bring to God the very best. You don't bring your scraps to the Lord. I can't tell you how many times through the years I've had people want to give scraps to God. You ever seen that? Well, I got a brand new laptop, preacher. It's got all these whiz-bang gizmos on it, but I just wonder if the church could use that old Commodore 64 that I have in the attic. No. You got it in the attic because it's a piece of junk. Don't bring it up here and give us junk, right? Why don't you give God that laptop and you play with the Commodore 64? Oh, no, we can't do that. Well, we have a tendency to be that way a little bit. We have a tendency to make sure that God gets the leftovers. And Joash is saying, look, I'm going to put the priests in charge. They're going to go to these accountants. If you've made a pledge, you make sure you're honoring God with what you have, and we're going to get this thing right. We're going to make sure that God is pleased because God is the priority in our life. Make sure that God always has first place in everything that you do. Now, I want you to notice what happens. Look in verse 6. Now it was so that by the 23rd year of King Joash, did I read that right? The priest hadn't repaired the damages. 23 years. I don't know what kind of damages they had, but 23 years? That's a long time. That's a lot of patience. That's a lot of waiting around. The damages had not been repaired. Why? Because the priest had failed to prioritize their work. They had failed to plan. They didn't put a plan together that was going to be working. And why did they not plan? Maybe they got busy. Listen, there's always something else to do. Priests always had sacrifices to offer and worship to plan and people to help. I mean, there's always something else to do. But they didn't make God's house a priority. And a lot of times we do that. So here's verse 7. Joash called Jehoiada the priest. And it probably hurt him to do this, by the way. But he calls Jehoiada the priest and the other priest, and he asked them this question: why have you not repaired the damages to the temple? Why have you not done this? It is very difficult to rebuke somebody and confront somebody, especially when you are close to them. It's not a lot of fun. If somebody's not doing their job, it doesn't bring us any joy to go say, hey, you're not doing your job. We got to work on this. We've got to figure out what's going on. That's not a pleasurable thing to do. But you've got to hold people accountable or else the work will never get done. And in church, that makes it really hard because everybody that serves in this church is a volunteer. Everybody that serves here, I mean, other than the staff, is a volunteer. But if somebody's not doing what they're responsible for doing, man, it's tough. And sometimes you have to be very careful about how you do that. But what Jehoiada needed to know was that leaders set the example, and if leaders don't lead by example, nobody else is going to follow them. Why would anybody follow, just words if you're not doing it yourself? I mean, leaders have to set the example. I take it very seriously, by the way, where James tells pastors and church leaders, he said, be not many teachers. Don't rush out to be a leader. Why? Because leaders will face a more severe judgment. That passage scares the daylights out of me. Because I know that one of these days I'm going to stand before God, and my judgment, if you will, my standard is going to be severe, is going to be serious, because God has put us in a position of leadership. If you take a position of leadership, you're accountable for how you lead. If you take a position as a teacher, you're accountable for how you teach. If you're going to be on a mission trip, you're accountable for how you conduct yourself on that mission trip. Leadership demands accountability. And churches need to teach that. That's not a bad thing. That's not being bullying or mean or whatever. It is to say, when God has empowered you with a gift, you are to use that gift to the best of your ability, and you're accountable for how you use it. And every one of us has a responsibility to use our gifts to impact others. We're accountable for our actions. Well, here in verse 7, he calls Jehoiada and he says, why have you not done your job? Why have you not done it? Then he says, verse 7, now therefore do not take more money from your constituency. Stop it. Don't go and take more money from those treasures. Don't go and do that. But here's what I want you to do. We're changing direction. He says, deliver it for repairing the damages of the temple. Verse 8, and the priest agreed that they would neither receive more money from the people nor repair the damages to the temple. He says, you guys could have had the greatest blessing of your ministry in repairing the house of God, one of these amazing wonders of the world, but you have shirked your responsibility. We're going to put you to the side. And what's going to happen now? Verse 9, then Jehoiada the priest took a chest. He bored a hole in the lid. He set it beside the altar on the right side as one comes into the house of the Lord. And the priest who kept the door put there all the money brought into the house of the Lord. And so it was that whenever they saw that there was money, much money in the chest, that the king's scribe and the high priest came up and put it in bags and counted the money that was found in the house of the Lord, and they gave that money, which had been apportioned, into the hands of those who did the work. He said, we're going to do this thing totally differently. He said, we're going to collect money. It's going to be watched over by both the priest and by people from the palace. There's going to be accountability for how it's handled. And it's not going to go to the priest for you guys to oversee the work. It's going to go directly to pay the plumber and the mason and the guy who works with the wood or whatever. And we're going to pay them directly. I think it's interesting how Joash does this. He says, get a chest. Bore a hole in the top and set it right over there. I don't know if y'all remember when we built this building, we would have Harvest Day. We still do. It comes up, by the way, this November. And we would put a chest over there. And kids would bring coins, they'd bring whatever. And it was just a wonderful way to remind them of giving and how it's an ancient tradition in Christianity for people to come and to give. Well, that's what they did back then. They brought this chest, they put money in it, and then it went directly out. But I want you to notice something. It was the responsibility of every person in Judah to honor the Lord with what they gave. Now, they weren't sending out bills here. Excuse me. They were collecting money from people who gave it willingly. Now, they did collect their tithes and those kinds of things, but then there were these special gifts that were given willingly above and beyond in order to get the work done. Now, this is what we would call a designated offering. They designated it for a particular purpose. And we still do that same thing today. We teach people God's standard is tithing. Tithing is 10% of your income. Then we give an offering that is above the tithe, and that offering can be for Zambian missions. It can be for international missions through Lottie Moon. It can be for our Mexico mission worker, our DR worker. It can be for youth or whatever. It can be for this building. We get special offerings every week to pay for this building. And we hope people will continue to give above and beyond the tithe to help us pay for this facility that we're in. But again, what they took here were special offerings. Now let me just tell you a couple of things that I found this week. There are people who are in charge of companies that do electronic giving. Everybody does electronic giving. We got an app, we got online giving. Everybody does that these days. But that has helped them find out a number of things about what's going on in church life today. Let me tell you what's going on in church life about honoring the Lord. That's the title of your lesson, honoring God, and whether or not we honor God with our giving. Here's what they have found out recently. They have found out that of those people who go to church, 5% of them tithe. 5%. They have found out that of, 247 million U.S. Christians, 247 million Christians in the United States, 1.5 million actually tithe. Now, if you want to know what's wrong with the church in America today, hey, blame what you want to blame. COVID, demographic change, cultural change, modern ideas, liberal, blame whatever you want to blame. But let me tell you, Jesus said, where your treasure is, there your heart is also. And if 5% of the people tithe and 1.5 out of 247 million people tithe, that tells me that we have a heart issue. And I don't go around blaming the White House for what goes on in the church. If you want to know where the answer to the spiritual needs of America are, they're not in the White House, never have been. They're in God's house. And when God's people get serious about making God a priority in their life, you'll see that reflected in lots of different things. But Jesus said you'll see it reflected in the way that we give. Where our treasure is, there's where our heart is. I don't know if I'm sure you haven't heard these, but this electronic giving company found that in America, the average gift per churchgoer, the average gift is $17 a week. That's $73.67 a month. There was some change in there. That's $884 a year. And then the question was, how many people in the church live on $8,840 a year? Because that would be a tithe on that amount of money. But the point is that people today don't see God as a priority. They don't see God as one who is to be honored. And Joash is simply saying we need to honor God with the way that we take care of His house. We need to honor God with the way that we take care of His resources. We need to honor God, in the way that we give. And they also went on to say, and I'll just throw this in, this is lagniappe for those of you who have some Louisiana roots. Lagniappe just means something thrown in. Something a little extra. Y'all ever watch Justin Wilson cook? Remember the Cooking Cajun? And he would just make his gumbo and then he'd throw in a little lagniappe. Whatever's in the kitchen, he'd just chunk it in there, okay? What I'm about to give you is just a little lagniappe. They went on to say that the key thing is to realize that for those who are aged 35 to 54, they're twice as likely to give if they can give electronically and on an app or something like that. And here's what they found out. And I'm not asking you to show me your wallet or anything, but they found out that 76% of the people today do not carry $50 or more in their pocket. People don't carry money. Nobody carries money. And if we have a family whose house burned down last night and we say, hey, we want to take a special offering, we're going to buy clothes and shoes, and we're going to do something, we won't get 15 cents at the back door. Now, we'll get it on Monday when everybody comes and gives at the office, or they'll bring it, but nobody has any money in their pocket anymore. Hey, I got money. Where'd I get that? But I don't have $50. And that's rare that I even got anything in my pocket. Nobody does it. Because money, man, that's old. That's the old way of doing things, right? And by the way, most money that you've got in your pocket's been through a drug transaction somewhere, you don't want to get pulled over, the dog might sniff you out. You may be in jail for that. I'm just telling you, people don't live the way that they used to live, but it doesn't matter whether it's dollars or apps or whatever the case might be. Here's the deal. The Old Testament says, honor God with what you have. Now let's finish, our lesson. Y'all look, if you will, in verse 11. Then they gave the money which had been apportioned into the hands of those who did the work, who had oversight of the house of the Lord. They paid it out to the carpenters, the builders who worked on the house. They got the middleman out of the way. Get rid of those preachers. They don't know what they're doing anyway. Make sure you give it to the carpenters. Make sure you give it to people who can do the work. Verse 12, they gave it to the masons and the stone cutters for buying timber and hewn stone to repair the damage of the house of the Lord, and for all that was paid out to repair the temple. However, there was not made for the house of the Lord basins of silver, trimmers, sprinkling bowls, trumpets, any articles of gold or silver, or articles of money from the money bought from the house of the Lord. But they gave that to the workmen, and they repaired the house of the Lord with it. There were some things they bought, but there were some things that they did not buy. They bought it out of a separate fund. They took it from a different pocket, if you will. But they made sure that all of the money went to those people who were actually doing the work. Let's look at verse 15. Moreover, they did not require an account from the men into whose hand they delivered the money to be paid to the workmen, for they dealt faithfully. They were honest. And the people from the trespass, or the money from the trespass offerings and the money from the sin offerings did not come into the house of the Lord. It belonged to the priest. Those offerings were already dedicated. They were already committed to the priest, and so they couldn't be utilized. But the point is, they honored God with everything that they did, and they were faithful in everything that they did, and they did it smart. They made sure that when the money went into the chest and the money came in, there was somebody from the palace and somebody from the priest. They had a two-man rule in taking care of things. Oh, by the way, that's just a good idea anywhere. You know, we have here a two-man rule. You know, I don't touch any money around this place. People think, well, I got to go to the preacher and see if I can get some money. Well, you ain't going to get nothing out of me, because I'm not on the budget committee and I'm not the treasurer, and I don't do it. And I'm not going to do it. We have people who do that, and it's always done with integrity. It's done with a two-man rule. Two people count, two people do all that. I mean, we make sure that it's done with that kind of integrity, because churches have had people who embezzled and all kinds of things. And we don't have a problem with Greg Eads embezzling. We have a problem with Greg Eads just being tight. He's going to take care of your money, man. He's going to take care of every dime of it, I promise you. Our office is very, very faithful in doing those kinds of things. But we honor God. That's the point of the lesson. With what we give, we honor God by making Him the priority in our life. Now, let me tell you what's going to happen this afternoon. This afternoon, we have a meeting scheduled, and it's with our Budget and Finance Committee, because every year we get 2 new members on the Budget and Finance Committee, and they're going to have an orientation for them, and they're going to train them. They're going to sit down and talk to them about, here's how everything works, and here's the policies, and here's how things are done. And we educate those people on how everything is handled, and how it's handled with wisdom, and how it's handled right. Because we believe that everything ought to be done decently and in order, and that every member of the church ought to have right to see everything that goes on. And you can do that anytime. Come to the office. They'll open it all up. They don't care. It's yours. It's actually the Lord's, but you're God's people. And so it's all done above board. And so we have a Budget and Finance Committee who does that, and they're going to meet this afternoon, and we appreciate their hard work. They'll present a budget to you. And when we present a budget to you, that'll be in November. We're not doing that to say, well, we got a lot of bills we got to pay. We need some money. That's not why we're doing that. You know what a budget is? A budget is a plan for God's people to do ministry. A budget is going to tell you we love missions and evangelism and youth and children and senior adults and preschoolers. A budget is going to tell you that we believe in worship. A budget is going to tell you that we believe in fellowship, and we believe in what the New Testament says about devoting yourself to the apostles' teaching, the fellowship, the breaking of bread, and prayer, and all the things that we do. And that budget is a ministry plan. That's what it is. It's not about getting money and paying the bills. God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, and He owns the potatoes that are planted on the hill. He owns everything. It's not about that. It's about us saying this is the way we will honor the Lord. Now again, Is that happening nationwide? Are people honoring the Lord? Let me just tell you one final thing, and we'll let you get out so you can go to the restroom. We'll take a little break before worship. Broke my heart week before last. Opened up a Baptist newspaper from Georgia. Baptist newspaper from Georgia said 180 churches stopped giving to missions. Another 100 churches down there reallocated their gifts. We're going to have to lay off our mission staff. We're going to have to lay off people across the state. And they had to go down the hallway and just said, you don't have a job, you don't have a job, you don't have a job. And they had to lay people off. We're seeing that in lots of places. Thankfully, in Tennessee, we are blessed. We're seeing some wonderful things happen in the state of Tennessee. But the truth of the matter is this. People aren't as honoring of the Lord as they used to be. Here in our church, when you add up all the things that we give to missions, we give almost 15% of everything that's collected, not even counting special offerings, to missions. We probably give close to 20% when it's all added up. 17, 18% to missions. We believe in missions around here. Do you know that the average gift to missions in churches across the country has dropped from over 10% in the 1990s to 4.68% today? 4.68%. We actually had to bring missionaries off the field and say, we can't afford to keep you on the mission field. That's heartbreaking because there's more people than there's ever been. There's more lost people than there's ever been. There's more opportunity than there's ever been. The field's white into harvest. The problem is not with people willing to go. It's people willing to stand back and hold the ropes. And making God a priority is the key to it all. Honoring God with all that we have. That's the key. So it's not about getting money. It's about ministry. It's about touching lives. It's about seeing lives changed. And I hope and I pray that as we've gone through this lesson, and I knew when I saw the lesson, hey, I didn't write this lesson, by the way, I just taught it. But when I saw the lesson, I thought, oh my, they're going to think we're just talking about money and all that. Well, you know what? Jesus said, treasure heart. They are linked. They are connected. And if our heart is passionate about the gospel of Jesus Christ, we're going to be generous. We're going to make sure that He's honored. And I want to say before I get out of here, thank you, because this church is a very generous church. Thank you for your faithfulness. Thank you who are tithers. Thank you who are faithful contributors. We love you. And most of all, God is honored by that. Thank you. We don't ever tell you that enough. But we just want to say thank you for honoring the Lord. I love you, Father. May we honor you with our lives, our gifts, our service, our talents. May we honor you in all things. May we never give you scraps. May we never give you scraps. May we always give you the best. We pray in the name of Christ. Amen. Thank y'all. Invite a friend, by the way. There's 4 or 5 chairs over here. We'd love to fill them up next week. Y'all invite a friend to come and be part of our class. We're going to have lunch one of these days. I'm going to get Jeff Wilson to cook us bologna sandwiches or something. We'll have a fellowship one of these days.